trying to put yourself in the shoes of the user and thinking about what would be, a great experience. And also we had this principle that we operated on, which is don't put the responsibility of security on the user, right? We felt like that was our job.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Devico Breakfast Bar. Here we speak with different people involved in the business landscape, share their expertise, delve into the latest tech trends, and explore the ins and outs of IT outsourcing. I'm Oleg Sadikov, and today I'm excited to have Dylan Casey. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new episodes. Hi Dylan, and thanks for joining me today.
Good morning, Oleg. I'm really happy to be here, so thanks for having me.
Let's start our podcast with a little blitz. I start a sentence and you continue.
Sure.
Career in tech gave me
amazing opportunities.
Career in tech deprived me
Of as much time as I wanted to ride my bike.
My main superpower
Is never giving up.
My main weakness is
never giving up.
When I'm afraid I
Take a step back and think.
It's a good quality. Not everyone has it.
Yeah.
Many people dream of transitioning careers. Could you describe your motivations or perhaps series of smaller realizations that led you to decide, okay, it was time to hang up your career in cycling and pursue your career in tech world?
Yeah, for the listeners or people that are watching the podcast, I was a professional cyclist for essentially what I consider the first part of my career. And there was a point in time, and I think this happens for a lot of athletes, where you realize, it's time to start thinking about the next step in your life. And I had kind of reached that step. I was really fortunate to be a part of the U.S. Postal Service cycling team and part of the story of Lance Armstrong winning the Tour de France, and had really achieved, things that I never imagined as an athlete. And in parallel to all of that, I was always, really deep into the tech world, and I loved, playing with the latest and greatest technology toys and products. And I was also living in Palo Alto, California at the time. It was kind of my winter home base when I wasn't racing in Europe. So I was surrounded by everything that was happening in the late 90s and early 2000s, and was really kind of in the right place at the right time to think about transitioning from being an athlete to a career in the tech industry. So a lot of it was just right place, right time, the right opportunities, and also just really kind of pursuing things that I was really interested in. And that's something that I've always done, which actually is what led to a career as an athlete. So at the time it didn't feel good. It felt scary. It wasn't like I had it all figured out. But I think one of the things that I've tried to do, especially in those kind of moments of transition or moments of making switches, to just being open to opportunities, even if they don't necessarily feel perfect. And what's ironic about that is that, I was really fortunate to have an opportunity to take a very early role at Google. And that turned out to be an amazing experience. And in hindsight, looked like, the most amazing transition that an athlete could make. But, in full transparency, when I was going through it, it didn't feel great.
What advice would you give to someone who feels they have a non-traditional background but aspires to a leadership role in a completely different industry? Well,
there's really a couple of things that I try to remind myself of all the time, and advice that I give to others is that, oftentimes I think people are trying to, understand how their background or their history or their skill set fits perfectly into, a role that they might be interested in. And what I try to do is to help people understand, what are the kind of general frameworks that they've used in their past, and then think about how those might apply, to this role that they're thinking about or to their future, and try to draw corollaries between them. And I'll tell you the one that I used. As an athlete, part of the job is understanding with absolute clarity what your objectives are. What are you trying to achieve? And then essentially breaking that down into, a set of actions or tactics that you can take to achieve those objectives. And, when I thought of working in the tech industry, and I think this is probably more broadly applicable to most industries, but I think it's really applicable in the tech industry, especially in the role of product management, is, you think about some problem that you're trying to solve what does that look like if you were able to solve it, and then essentially working backwards. So, as an athlete, you think about, races that you want to win, or, reaching certain milestones that are relevant to your sport, and you kind of work backwards from that. And you kind of come up with a training plan, which is basically the equivalent to a roadmap. And then you execute against that plan. In an ideal situation, you show up on race day ready to go. And, there's a very direct correlation between that and, building a product for a customer or for a user, and then coming up with a roadmap of things that you're going to do to get there. And then I think the other underlying qualities and attributes that are transferable is, holding yourself accountable, controlling the variables that you can control, understanding how to make trade-offs, how to deal with setbacks along the way, and then ultimately showing up, on race day or on the launch day, ready to go, and being in the mindset of dealing with adversity and understanding how to manage pressure and essentially rising to the occasion. So, it's a very long-winded way of saying it. It's just understand the problem that you're trying to solve, have a plan for solving it, execute against your plan, and, be prepared for race day. And I think there's a lot of correlations between that and, working in the tech industry.
I completely agree with you regarding the correlations in business and sport. I used to be a triathlete.
Yeah.
I did triathlon in the past. So now I'm playing tennis, and I see a lot of correlations in sport and business. But I guess it's similar in many areas.
Yeah.
Yeah. You launched Yahoo Account Key.
Yeah.
Can you share what went into identifying that opportunity and executing it successfully? That's an amazing achievement.
Yeah, no, thank you. So at the time I was working at Yahoo and leading product for the identity platform. So essentially, all of the infrastructure and all of the front ends for creating Yahoo account, logging into your Yahoo account, recovering access to your Yahoo account. And, one of the challenges that we were trying to address was the fact that no one can remember their password. And, at the time we had a really kind of old recovery mechanism called secret questions and answers, right? Like, where did you go to high school? What was the name of your favorite, of your pet dog? Or, what was the name of the street you grew up on? And oftentimes people just don't remember those. It's just not built into the way we think. And so we were really thinking about how can we make it really easy for users to get access to their account and to create an account. And this was around 2013, 14, 15, and obviously mobile was becoming, a really important modality for users. And, we thought to ourselves, most of our users are logged into their account on their phone. And oftentimes, they're trying to log into their account on another device, or whether it's another phone or a tablet or a desktop environment. And we thought to ourselves, what if we just made it possible for them to, access their account using their mobile phone? And obviously, people were starting to use text message as essentially a second factor, a way to, a third way to prove account ownership. And so we said, well, if they're logged in, why can't we just why can't we just send them a push notification that they can simply tap yes or no to? Mm-hmm. And so in hindsight, it seems like an obvious, solution, but at the time, no one was doing it. And, we understood that if we could make it easy for people to log into their accounts, it would have a massive positive impact, for users, and then also just our business across Yahoo. So we basically went on this journey, and we invested a bunch of resources into understanding what it was going to take to do it from a technical perspective. And we focused a lot of resources on mobile design and just design in general. And ultimately, we were able to launch what we called Yahoo Account Key. And we were the first company in the industry to really launch this type of functionality. And it's great because now you see it everywhere, right? So it was something that we were really proud of, and I think had a really positive impact on our users and the business in general. But, it's a great example of trying to put yourself in the shoes of the user and thinking about what would be, a great experience. And also we had this principle that we operated on, which is don't put the responsibility of security on the user, right? We felt like that was our job. And so it was a kind of guiding principle that we used that really helped us make that breakthrough.
You have worked on products with massive scale, definitely. What's your approach to product market fit when you build something from scratch, something with huge potential?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I started my career at Google working on products that for the most part were really already in the market, right? We already had product market fit with search, obviously, even when I started in 2003. And, the approach and the mentality to solving problems for the users is different in that scenario because, you're kind of optimizing for the existing experience, right? And I think it's a different mentality than when you're building something from scratch. And, even in the scenario where, for example, in search, we built, something that we built from scratch, we called real-time search, which was really the ability to answer queries that were real-time in nature. Queries like power outage in Palo Alto or traffic on the 101, right? Like the static web results for those queries just weren't that good. And so even though we had an established product and we had product market fit, we built something from scratch that essentially solved the problem for the customer. But we were doing it at such scale, right? And in some cases, it makes some things easier because, for example, we could run a 0.001% experiment and get meaningful feedback from a statistical perspective on whether or not a product was working or not, right? Kind of air quotes working. So there's a little bit of like an approach to building product. When you're building something from scratch, you're really in a different mindset, which is like you have this hypothesis almost of a problem that you think users or customers have. And it requires a much more of experimental mindset. And I think that, in the 0 to 1 approach, which is often where startups are operating, we hear a lot more of the buzzwords around, lean startup, right? Which is like build quickly and iterate and get as much feedback as you can from the 50 or 100 beta users that you get to verify or validate your hypothesis. Or why building an MVP, which is really just another way of saying build a prototype and see if build just enough to test your hypothesis, nothing more, nothing less. And this whole idea of, that Facebook made famous of, move fast and break things, it's a completely different mentality in some ways. And I think a lot of people struggle with understanding how to kind of apply general product management frameworks to, an existing product that already has product market fit, or how do you apply the various product management frameworks to something that has zero product market fit, right? You're trying to find it. But I think, with enough courage and discipline and, a general fundamental understanding of a lot of the product management principles that are, really common now, you can operate in both worlds. I think the important thing is to understand which world are you operating in, right? And I kind of come up with this concept of understand what mode you're in, and then, apply your approach or apply your framework appropriately based on what mode you're in. So I think a lot of it is just thinking about, actually really what's the fundamental problem that you're trying to solve. Like, for example, if you're building a car and your objective is to build the most aerodynamic car possible, you're going to build a prototype, but you're not going to be worried about the car stereo or the air conditioning or the seats that are in the car. You're really just thinking about, is this car aerodynamic? So your MVP or your prototype better not have a car stereo or air conditioning in it, because it just means you've overbuilt it for what you're trying to, really figure out.
I agree.
So
Completely agree.
That's how I think about it.
How do you see the relationship between human-centered design and AI evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, what a fantastic question. I think I try to carve up the application of AI into different buckets, right? Because I think a lot of us are using AI tools in our own kind of quote workflows, right? And then of course there are consumer facing AI tools, where we actually interact with it. And obviously there's a lot of gray space in those two comparisons. But I think, right now there's a lot of interesting conversation going on around what is the right interface for consumers with LLMs, right? Which is the fundamental underpinnings of artificial intelligence. And, I think that there's a couple of important things to just keep reminding ourselves of, which is that we're so early, right? And the tech adoption life cycle is also much different than it was, when we were first building tools for the internet or we were first building mobile devices. So it's a completely different environment right now. But I think, human interaction design and frameworks have to evolve. And I think one of the most important things that we need to do, especially as product managers or designers, is kind of challenge the status quo, right? Like we're starting to see a lot of tools coming online with the Ray-Ban Meta glasses and some of the other devices that are being built and released, which is kind of challenging the existing interface of, a web browser or a mobile app. And I think the key to getting it right, and I don't know what the right answer is, but I think the key to getting it right is, challenging that status quo and not being scared to kind of completely rethink what the quote interface is going to be.
Across Google, Goldman, and WiseCode, you have built and led diverse teams. What's your formula for creating high-performing cross-functional product teams? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I remember when I joined Yahoo, I inherited a team that historically just wasn't known for performing really well. And it was a platform organization, right? Like identity is essentially a platform. And, one of the first things that my close engineering partner and I spent a bunch of time on was really thinking through, what were all the critical pieces that a team needed to perform well. And we just went back to basics. And we asked ourselves, does the team understand exactly what they're supposed to do? Like, why do they exist? What is the value proposition of the service or the platform that they are building, to customers, users, and the company? And we discovered that part of the challenge that the team was facing was that because they didn't have a lot of clarity around what their mandate was, and they were a platform organization, which meant that they were being asked to do a lot of things from different stakeholders all at the same time. They didn't have a good framework for making trade-offs. They didn't have a good framework for understanding what the priorities were of the 10 things they were being asked to do. And the side effect of that is that they were essentially running around, in fire drill mode, constantly putting out fires. And that's just really, teams just don't operate well at scale for long periods of time like that. So we recognize that one of the fundamental requirements to have a high-performance team was absolute clarity on what the objective was and, why they were doing what they were supposed to do. So we just went back to basics and rebuilt everything from the ground up, starting with our mission statement. We had a mission statement that was like a paragraph long and looked like it had been developed by a consultant. And we were like, whoa, like our value here is very simple. In the context of identity, our job was to keep the bad guys out and let the good guys in. And it was really nothing more than that at a very, very high level. And so we just started by rewrite the mission statement, get clarity around, who our users were, who our customers were, and get clarity around how we measured our success, right? Like what was our North Star metrics and how could we basically build a set of OKRs around this? So, long story short, we just basically put in the basic building blocks and the underlying foundation for the team. And once we did that, it had a massive impact on the team from a positive perspective because now they knew how to say no to things and yes to others. They understood how to prioritize all of the inbound requests that they were getting. And then they also understood intimately exactly what numbers were they trying to impact. I mean, we even went all the way to the earnings call. Like what number in the earnings call could we take, accountability for? So across all the teams I've worked on and at all the different companies that I've worked at, that's one of the things that I think about as a requirement for building a high performance team. And it goes, then it kind of goes, you build from there. But at the very least, having absolute clarity around the problem that you're solving and why you're solving it and how you're going to measure it is the fundamental requirement across all teams, all industries, all types of tech products, and every company that I've worked at.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing this.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing, IT outsourcing, I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting because I kind of put it in the same category of the common debate that a lot of companies have internally of buy versus build. And what's interesting about that is that, having kind of grown up at Google where we more or less built everything ourselves, it was an interesting experience to then go on to a small startup where we didn't have the resources to build everything, right? And so we used a lot of off-the-shelf tools. For example, we didn't build our own email system. We didn't build our own bug tracking system. We didn't build our own designs tools, etc. Even project or product management tools. We just used third-party vendors. But I think internally, it's important to understand how to apply your superpowers, right, from a company perspective. And I think that there's some corollary between that and the decisions around leveraging teams outside of your organization. And I think there's a bunch of different models. And, I think understanding, oftentimes, especially in startups where, I like to say that you're trying to cross a bridge, a rope bridge that's on fire behind you, and you're running across that bridge. Sometimes it's important to understand what's the best allocation of your existing resources. And some of those resources are, financial, and some of those resources are headcount. So that's kind of a general framework that I like to use. I think also one of the benefits of using outsourced teams is it's a great way to tap into talent, especially on a global level, especially since, we've kind of transitioned into this world where, you don't have to have a team sitting in your building. So I think that's a general framework that I use to think about that.
What steps can leaders take to ensure a smooth transition when moving to an outsourced IT team?
Well, there's a couple things. One of the practices that I love is when you can embed somebody in the outsourced team. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical, but, where you're really allocating somebody to kind of embed metaphorically in that team, or vice versa, when somebody from the outsourced team actually comes and sits with you. And I think that sometimes people often overlook that step and how critical it is, especially in the onboarding phase. So that's one of the things that I like to do when I'm working with outside teams. And I think leaders also have to take a very active role in that process, as opposed to just handing it off. And I think also one of the things that I've done in the past that I've found that has really helped is to almost have kind of like, an onboarding manual, so to speak, right? That kind of articulates, here's how we work. Here's the way here's our set of rituals as a company that we use to build product, whether it's, here's how we do product reviews, engineering reviews, design reviews. Here's our kind of launch checklist that we go through when we're about to push something to production. And so I think sharing that, and kind of all of those cultural norms with the teams that you're working with outside is one of the most critical steps that you can do. It kind of ensures the, alignment between the organizations or between the teams.
How do you see the role of IT outsourcing evolving in the context of your industry future?
Well, I think we've probably seen some of that evolution in the last couple of years, given the kind of impact of more remote work. I think that that's going to continue. I think also because the mechanisms that we have in place for communication and workflow are evolving, that's going to have an impact on how we work with outside teams. I think AI is obviously going to have a big impact on that, especially from the tooling perspective. But I think more broadly, there's an interest. It's funny. I often think about teams that get put together to make movies as an interesting model. And it's something that I've spent a bunch of time kind of investigating. And here's why. If you think about a movie, you get a bunch of actors together and they work together for a fixed amount of time to basically produce this movie. And then once the movie is produced, it gets launched, and then that team gets kind of dispersed, and they go work on their next movie or their next project. And the thing that's kind of interesting about that is that, if you're really good and you're really lucky, you get to work with the best people all of the time. And there's something interesting about that model that I think the tech industry could learn from. And I think I think there's an interesting opportunity there with regards to outsourced teams, where it's not necessarily thinking about this like outsourcing kind of concept, but it's really about how do we assemble a team to kind of address a problem or build or build something in a limited scope of time, and then you kind of like, okay, we built it, launched, like, let's move on. And it's almost kind of like where you have these people in your network that you can call on, to kind of work on something when you need to pull together, your A team, so to speak. So I think there's I haven't quite figured it out yet, but my gut tells me that there's something interesting there. And I think if we could kind of figure out a way to tap into that, I think there's an interesting opportunity.
Dylan, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining me today. Today, very interesting conversation. You're a very experienced person.
Thank you.
Extraordinary. And really, thanks for finding time to speaking with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoy our discussion and want to stay updated on the future episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way, you will not miss out on the latest insights and conversations from the Devico Breakfast Bar. See you in the next episode.